I am Euzhan Palcy, director of the film A Dry White Season, and you are watching South Africa Now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa.
It doesn't exist on television, and it doesn't exist.
I would actually appeal to the world that information is there and can be found.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
This week, South Africa Now presents these stories. It's official. De Klerk assumes power in South Africa, while a peaceful march protests brutality. In Namibia, SWAPO leader Sam Nujoma comes home, as one of SWAPO's white activists is murdered. We'll show an interview with him.
I've been in detention 6 times. I've been 2 assassination attempts, and a lot of sort of threatening calls and threats made to my life.
Oil is the fuel that keeps South Africa alive despite a UN-endorsed embargo. Who are the sanctions busters? We'll name some in an investigative report.
Despite the worldwide embargo of South Africa, those who are crying the loudest to boycott oil shipments to South Africa are in fact the biggest suppliers.
And he said it's called apartheid. I said, how can you be so cruel?
And in our culture segment, Tony Bird, a distinctive Southern African Dylan. You'll hear him sing.
Browns and PC River bringing down free waters for Zimbabwe.
All of these stories and more this week on South Africa Now, with hosts Fana, Kekana and Carolyn Craven.
Dumelang. Namibia tops the news this week as SWAPO leader Sam Nujoma returns home after 30 years in exile, possibly to become that country's first president. But Nujoma arrives amidst fears for his safety following the assassination of the organization's most prominent white member who was gunned down in the streets of Windhoek, Namibia's capital. Joseph Diescho has more in our Namibia Watch.
After almost 30 years in exile, Sam Nujoma, president of the Namibian Liberation Movement, SWAPO, was sent off from his base in Angola by that country's president, Dos Santos. An Ethiopian Airways jet carried Nujoma to Namibia, where he was greeted by supporters and reunited with his mother.
How do you feel, Mr. Nujoma?
Very happy to be home.
It's been a long time, hasn't it?
The 60-year-old Nujoma received a hero's welcome. The son of cattle farmers, he was arrested in 1960 for organizing strikes and boycotts, protesting apartheid in Namibia. He escaped and began a campaign to end South Africa's long occupation of his country, which culminated in United Nations recognition of SWAPO as the sole and authentic representative of the Namibian people. Earlier this year, Nujoma told South Africa Now about his hopes for returning to Namibia.
About 31 years ago, we took a vow that we will challenge the South African oppressors. And we did. It's been a long time, but we have had conviction and belief that we are fighting for a just cause and we are about to win.
While there was joy at Nujoma's arrival, it was almost overshadowed by the assassination of a key SWAPO member, human rights lawyer Anton Lubowski, who was gunned down in front of his home by shots from a passing car. The White Wolves, a shadowy group of white racists, has reportedly claimed responsibility for the killing, and a man carrying an Irish passport has been arrested. Even the official South African administrator claimed to have been shocked. Inside Namibia, observers say Lubowski was targeted as the sole white leader in the SWAPO organization, and that his murder was a warning to other whites who would support the movement. Death threats continue against the SWAPO leadership, and a number of prominent white liberals have also been threatened, including Gwen, the award-winning editor of the Namibian newspaper, who was a longtime friend of Lubowski.
I think it also serves as a warning to Namibians that in this current process, The lunatic fringe, as they can be referred to possibly, or by another name, the white wolves, as they tend to call themselves, cannot be underestimated. They are people who obviously feel that a SWAPO government, in terms of the pending elections, is an inevitability, and they are planning to do everything at their disposal to try and do what they can in the time that's left to them before independence, to try and target various leaders of the movement.
Long the spirits of Comrade Lubowski, long live! Long live! Viva Lubowski, viva! Viva!
The death of the 37-year-old Lubowski continued to evoke an emotional response in Namibia, where a number of memorials have been held.
Perhaps the most important thing about his life was his fearless articulation of the need for whites to realize the hostility and violence of apartheid, and to be a bridge builder between whites in Namibia, who had a very affluent life, and the black nationalist movement, SWAPO. And he did that very ably, and many of the whites became less concerned about SWAPO's intentions as a result of his very strong and single-minded stand, which saw many, many death threats to him and his family and his wife and children.
A year ago, on a visit to New York, Lubowski explained how he became the first white to publicly embrace SWAPO.
I'm a third-generation Namibian, born in Lüderitz, and after I finished my studies in law, I started practicing and was immediately involved in defending SWAPO court cases. Through that, I came into touch with a lot of my comrades, and then in 1984, I decided to join SWAPO openly. By that time, I was what can call a sort of prominent lawyer inside the country, and I decided to join SWAPO. And since then, I've been in detention 6 times. I've been 2 assassination attempts, and a lot of sort of threatening calls and threats made to my life. And it's just been a... But now things are changing inside Namibia. I think that at that time, the whites excluded me socially totally from their social activity. But now the things are changing. I think in the last year to year and a half, the whites have more and more opened up for independence.
It is still not clear what impact these events will have on United Nations Resolution 435, the UN plan for Namibia's independence, or on Namibia's elections still scheduled for November. South Africa Now will continue to follow this story. This is Joseph Diescho with Namibia Watch.
In South Africa, F.W. de Klerk was officially elected state president by that country's electoral college. But the eyes of the world were on the streets outside the parliament, where more than 20,000 people marched through Cape Town in a peaceful protest. Nadja Smith reports.
It was the largest anti-apartheid march in South Africa in 30 years, and it went off peacefully as police stayed away, under orders from President F.W. de Klerk. Archbishop Desmond Tutu walked arm in arm with Gordon Oliver, the white mayor of Cape Town.
We say we are the rainbow people. We are the new people of a new South Africa.
De Klerk's willingness to call off the police followed another public relations move, a decision to forbid the police from using whips called sjamboks, in part because such displays look bad in the international press. The police say it's more humane to use whips than guns, although, as these pictures testify, sjamboks have caused considerably painful damage. The move also followed statements from 2 policemen who spoke out against brutality in their own ranks.
My heart beats the same as yours, and that's why I think we are standing here today. So please, I don't want you to get hurt. I'll see to that you don't get hurt. Peacefully go back to your schools and wherever you are supposed to go, and thank you very much.
Meanwhile, as major U.S. newspapers were hailing de Klerk's cabinet choices as a signal of reform, the appointments really seem more like a tribute to the past. The most prominent members of P.W. Botha's cabinet will remain in their posts under de Klerk, including Law and Order Minister Adriaan Vlok, who has been the target of protests against police brutality and reportedly opposed the decision to get rid of the police whips. This is Nadja Smith for South Africa Now.
In our news summary, South Africa became an issue in New York City's mayoral campaign when David Dinkins, the winner of the Democratic nomination, cited his support for local laws against doing business with companies involved in South Africa in his television ads.
And he led the effort to crack down on city contractors doing business with South Africa.
Dinkins, who could become New York's first African-American mayor, expressed his views in an earlier interview with South Africa Now.
It seems to me that the sanctions do have an effect. And if the day comes when we're able to have the United States in the vanguard of this effort as they should be, instead of talking this nonsense of constructive engagement, when Great Britain and others will join the fray, I think it will make a difference.
Also from New York, the government of prosperous Westchester County has voted to withdraw $40 million from Citibank to protest the bank's dealings with South Africa. Citibank recently extended more than $600 million in loans to the South African government. Activists in Westchester say they will now focus on Manufacturers Hanover, which is scheduled to renegotiate its loans with South Africa next year.
The president of Botswana, Kwet Masire, was in the United States to accept an award from the Hunger Project for his leadership in preventing famine. From 1981 to 1987, while Africa was experiencing one of the worst droughts in history, no one in Botswana died from hunger. We asked Masire how Botswana has been affected by the recent events of its powerful neighbor, South Africa.
Whatever happens there is bound to spill on us. We have our people living under constant threats of bomb scares or actual bomb blasts. We have refugees in the country who are under our protection, their lives being threatened, and it just makes life unlivable. And so the sooner we can have democratic South Africa where peace reigns supreme, and everybody's rights are respected, so much better for Botswana.
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
Oil keeps the South African economy alive, but South Africa has no oil of its own, and the UN has appealed to countries not to supply it. So where does the oil come from? In South Africa, it's against the law to discuss the names of sanctions busters, but that hasn't stopped our investigative editor, Eric Nedler, from looking into the secretive oil trade.
These are the docks in Cape Town, South Africa. This port is a final destination in one of the world's most clandestine businesses, South Africa's secret oil trade. It's a billion-dollar business, and South Africa Now's investigation has fresh details on a covert international network of oil dealers, including a close business associate of President George Bush's national security advisor. Our inquiry shines a light on the subterfuge that's used to evade and avoid the oil embargo against South Africa.
Transshipment in high seas of oil originating from point A to point B.
At a United Nations hearing in Geneva in early September, investigators offered new information about how South Africa continues to fuel its military machine. These people are part of a kind of people's intelligence agency, the Shipping Research Bureau based in Amsterdam. We interviewed the Bureau's director in Holland.
The South African government has been able to set up an oil procurement apparatus in which it has been aided by a number of oil traders and a number of oil shipping companies, and the whole system seems to operate quite well.
South Africa's schemes began in 1979 when the Shah of Iran, who supplied South Africa with 97% of its crude oil, was overthrown. Iran's new government officially agreed to a UN-imposed world oil embargo against South Africa.
Everything changed. There was then no oil exporting country which was openly willing to supply its crude oil to South Africa. The South Africans panicked with cause to some extent and raced to set up various schemes.
Pretoria's response? Break the boycott at any price and find a way to these men, the Arab oil sheiks. The South Africans contacted wheeler-dealer middlemen who had connections to the Middle East. In Holland, John Duyss, a former used car salesman, brokered long-term deals for Pretoria. Between 1979 and 1983, Duyss alone provided South Africa with 25% of its imported oil. In 1985, Duyss's house was firebombed by a group calling itself Pyromaniacs Against Apartheid. He pledged to get out of the South African oil trade in 1987. Another oil trader, Mark Rich, a fugitive from the United States for tax evasion, he fled to Switzerland. He's one of the richest men in the world. Between 1979 and 1986, he bought 6.5 million tons of oil for South Africa. Here's how the deals work. South Africa pays the middlemen up to $8 per barrel above the market price. It's been estimated that beating the oil embargo has cost Pretoria more than $2 billion annually. Rutgers University professor Arthur Klinghoffer has written Oiling the Wheels of Apartheid, an expose of this secret oil trade.
It's so desperate to secure oil that it has to enter into deals with anyone willing to supply it. And this means it deals with many shady characters, some of whom defraud South Africa, but interestingly, South Africa never prosecutes them because it would rather be defrauded than have the information revealed as to its actual source of supply.
And where is that supply? Where the oil is? Primarily here in the Middle East. Attorney Robert Whitehill has written about the sources of South Africa's oil.
Despite the worldwide embargo of South Africa, those who are crying the loudest to boycott oil shipments to South Africa are in fact the biggest suppliers. Saudi Arabia, Oman, United Emirates, Iran, and Brunei in the East Indies make up 86% of the South African oil supply.
The London Observer identified a key Middle East connection in the clandestine oil trade. Dr. Omar Zawawi of Oman, a mysterious globe-trotting businessman close to the Sultan of Oman. Newspaper archives have no photos of Zawawi, and his office refused to provide us with one. At a time of Pretoria's greatest need in 1980, Zawawi reportedly arranged for the sale of 44 million tons of Omani crude to South Africa.
Omar Zawawi is a major connection between South Africa and Middle East oil sources. He has strong connections in Oman, in the government, in his family, and with former administration officials here in the United States.
Former and present officials. Brent Scowcroft, now National Security Advisor to President George Bush, was a business associate of Zawawi's at the time of his reported oil sales to Pretoria. Scowcroft was an officer of a company named International 6. Founded in Panama by Zawawi and made up of former members of the Johnson, Nixon, and Ford administrations. We asked Scowcroft specific questions about his business dealings in a letter we dropped off at his White House office. Scowcroft refused any comment. Dr. Zawawi's response was more definitive. An aide told us, Dr. Zawawi makes it a policy never to answer any questions from any reporter on any subject at any time. ABC News revealed a precedent of U.S. officials' involvement in the clandestine oil trade. CIA Director William Casey believed Saudi oil would entice the South Africans to help the Nicaraguan Contras.
On the French Riviera, CIA Director William Casey met with Saudi Arabia's King Fahd. Casey sought to persuade Fahd to provide covert aid for the Contras in Nicaragua, for the rebels in Angola, and he urged Fahd to provide oil to South Africa.
The United Nations is interested in this shady business. Officials there complain they are not getting straight answers either. UN Ambassador Joseph Garba of Nigeria, incoming head of the General Assembly, monitors the oil embargo.
Unfortunately, when the reports do come, and once in a while they do mention countries by name, these countries, in the exercise of their sovereignty, sometimes refuse to accept that the reports are accurate. So it's really difficult for me to say to you who are the defaulters, but oil does get to South Africa. I know that for sure.
Some tactics used to bust the oil boycott are 1. Hiding the true destination of oil tankers. 2. Falsifying official port documents in order to camouflage the true cargo of a ship. And 3. Transshipping oil from one tanker to another on the high seas. Here's one example. A crew member slipped the Shipping Research Bureau these pictures, which show a Norwegian tanker transferring oil to another ship off the coast of South Africa. And the shipping companies make millions busting the embargo. According to the Shipping Research Bureau, this company, Worldwide Shipping Limited of Hong Kong, is the world's leading shipper of oil to South Africa. It is estimated that this firm brings in up to 25% of all the oil carried into South Africa. When we visited their U.S. offices in New York, they didn't want to talk to us at all.
We have no such information.
Because we're just trying... Is there someone here that can talk to us, that can give us a statement about it? I mean, it's clear that there is shipments going on into South Africa.
No, but this doesn't involve us, so we don't know.
Doesn't involve you?
Yeah, we in our office here, we have nothing to do with any shipment.
South Africa Now's crew was then escorted out of the building. The South African government refused to answer our questions about the shadowy oil trade, but it's clear it fears tougher sanctions.
The issue is, can the noose be tightened and tightened and tightened? It's already a real noose. They are really feeling the effect. As that noose tightens, the price that they have to pay for their oil goes up and up, but also they get more and more alarmed, more and more scared, and they say, gee, maybe we really are going to have to make concessions to the black majority. Maybe we are going to have to go along with some of the things the international community is asking us to do.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
Tony Bird grew up in what is now Malawi when it was formerly a British colony. He is known as a musician with a distinctive voice and viewpoint, and is the feature of this week's culture segment. William Zizi has this profile on Tony Bird.
I was born behind the tombstone of Victorian kings and queens, in a land of tea and tennis, colonial pomp and gin. Well, I grew up in the Bundu.
With a voice reminiscent of Bob Dylan, Tony Bird has been singing about his roots in Africa for more than 2 decades. Born in Malawi in 1945, Bird and his music evoke the beauty and the passion of Southern Africa.
Well, the trouble when you judge another for the color of their skin is in time they in turn will judge you for the color of your sin.
I regard myself as very, very fortunate in the long run to have been born in Africa, because a lot of the way that I think today comes from the exposure to the people of that continent and the continent itself.
Sorry, Africa. Oh, sorry, Africa. I'm sorry for my people. I'm sorry what they did to you.
Bird's music often has political overtones. In this song, Sorry Africa, he sings of the suffering that still oppresses so many black Africans, a real challenge for a white African.
Basically, being a white African singer singing about Africa, often people just haven't really believed me, or they haven't believed that I'm sincere, or, you know, people have perhaps thought that I'm trying to make money out of their culture. And it's been very, very difficult, you know, and it's also been hard in a sense from the record company point of view, because everyone who's ever heard me has tried to classify me and really hasn't been able to come up with a category, because I'm not really imitating African music directly. I really have evolved my own little sound, as it were, you know. And it's been very complicated. Yeah.
And Africa, after all, the fighting is done. Sadly, we'll see there was no need for the blood to run. That there's peace and caring and respect, not illusions of fears and untruths. But I'm sorry, Africa, I'm sorry.
This song was actually inspired by the independence of Zimbabwe. A lot of people reacted to that song when I first wrote it because they thought it was the guilty white man pouring out his heart, sort of thing. I wanted it to be a healing song of white Africans saying, yes, we finally got there.
Aside from the message of unity, his songs and lyrics describe the beauty of the country he considers home.
How I love to wander across the Acacia plains, where blue rollers flash and the wild red is flame. With starling shine with violence as they shimmer with the thorn. To nature I'm sworn, I'm glad that I was born out in the tangle. To nature I'm so warm. Where the young grass so grows on my mind. Where I love to go, yeah, yeah. Out in the tangle. I'm a happy in the bushes, the tangle and the young grass.
I just long to be a humble bridge between people. I think that music often communicates with people when politicians aren't. And it does have a role to play.
I was so happy in the bushes, in the long grass, in the long grass. I was so happy in the bushes, in mama, in the tangle, where the long grass. Oh, the tangle, mama, the tangle, yeah, the tangle.
Thank you for watching South Africa Now. You can now listen to a radio edition of our program, which is available to interested radio stations. For a free resource guide on the issues we cover, or to obtain a transcript, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, P.O. Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. Transcripts are $3. Ask for show N108. We also welcome your comments. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund. Next week, South Africa Now brings you exclusive coverage from Geneva, Switzerland, as the United Nations examines the role of transnational corporations in South Africa. Plus, a special preview of A Dry White Season, the new Hollywood movie with Marlon Brando about an Afrikaner's fight against apartheid. On behalf of everyone at South Africa Now, I'm Fana Kekana. We leave you now with more of the music of Tony Bird.
Now the number one time special of the year is mango time, mango time. In Africa, the grand time again. It's a mango time, mango time. It's a mango time, my yes, you feel so good when you look up in the tree. And it's a mango time, mango time. See everywhere the green and yellow juicy. It's a mango time, mango time. It's a mango time, now my woman come back to me the mango time, mango time, mango time. She says the nightingale while you always up in the trees. You never see but mango time, but mango time. My mind is always in the trees with the mango time.